is Francis William Cawley. My highest rank was E4, Petty Officer, 3rd class. Well, when I first got into the Navy, I went to boot camp at the Naval Station up in Chicago at Great Lakes. Oh, that was a crazy thing, coming as an Irish Catholic kid from Boston and going into the Navy. Because I had had 1 semester of college, I was handed all the paperwork for about 9 other gentlemen that were going to Great Lakes with me, because I had the education, and these guys were all, you know, street kids and everybody else, and so I was handed a job with responsibility right from my first day, and it seemed to follow me through my 4 years with the Navy. Well, Great Lakes was mainly educational. I think more than anything it was getting us in physical shape, a lot of marching, a lot of drilling with a weapon for parade, and classes on seamanship and knot tying, and things about the lessons you're going to have to learn at a ship. When you come from the street and you've never been on a ship and worked in the Navy, you have to get put into a place where at least you understand the phrases that are going to be used, and the education you're going to need to go throughout the fleet. You don't know exactly what you're going to be doing till you finish boot camp and you get your orders and are told where you're going. So could be firemen on the bottom of the aircraft carrier feeding in the fuel. You might be a yellow shirt on the flight deck. So to go from, you know, a kid that lived with his 5 brothers and sisters, mom and dad, grandfather, you know, to go from family life to the military life and the Navy life, there was a lot to learn, you know, vocabulary, the way other people from different states, you know, interacting as a kid from Boston with kids from Tennessee and Georgia and California. We all had differences of opinions at times, but at the end, it was all it seemed to be, it was to try to get you to become a teammate and learn how to be a teammate with people. Even if you don't know them very long, you're able to work with them or train with them. That was probably the most rewarding part of being in the Navy. And from Great Lakes, I went to training at Lakehurst, New Jersey for aviation bosun's mate. When you finished your termination of your education part and you're getting ready and you know you're getting ready to leave, you get a set of orders that tell you where you're going to go. And when they gave me AB, it was that's aviation bosun. There's about 4 categories of aviation bosun's mate, and I just ended up in the B. There are 3 categories basically: aviation bosun's mate handler, aviation bosun's mate equipment, and aviation bosun mate fuels. And one of my buddies from school and I went into the Navy together, went through boot camp together, but he ended up on an aircraft carrier in California, and I ended up on a carrier in Virginia and Florida. Well, the good thing about Lakehurst is I had an uncle who was career military that was at the McGuire Air Force Base, so on the weekends I could go get home, cook meals from my aunt and uncle, and that was a good part about it. But again, several of the guys I went through boot camp with ended up at aviation bosun's mate A school in Lakehurst, and we actually trained. Our classroom work was in the dirigible hangar where the Hindenburg crashed. So we were in that hangar at the rooftop level. They have catwalks and classrooms, and we learned about the firefighting that we were going to have to learn, shipboard firefighting, aircraft firefighting on the flight deck. We went from there. During the course at Lakehurst, we went to Philadelphia, to the shipyards in Philadelphia, where we learned shipboard firefighting, and at the base in New Jersey, we learned aircraft firefighting and the different kind of things they were using at that time to use to put out fires. The one they're having that trouble with now, with people getting sick from it, and the light water and purple K powder and the mixture of salt water and the chemicals they used on the flight deck at that time too. So we were on fire pads or in fire structures almost every day. It was something that going to be, like I said, a kid from the streets, and just out of high school and some college, to the Navy way of learning and being able to know what nomenclature you need on the end of the fire hose, to make sure that as you pass through something that might be knee-deep in fuel or water, and put out a fire in the next compartment, and learning how to do that. It was a great learning experience for anybody, because you were doing it on the flight deck level and on the shipboard level. So that was pretty tough work. It's very physical, but there's a lot of stuff you have to know too to be safe and keep the people that are there with you safe. And from aviation as a boatswain's mate in New Jersey, I went to the USS Saratoga. Well, I didn't even know what the Saratoga was yet, and where it was placed. But when I found out I was going, my first shipboard place to go was Port, Florida. A kid from Boston living in Florida, even though it was on an aircraft carrier, was something that was really exciting for me. It was great, and getting to know the people, walking on the gangplank and giving your orders to the officer of the deck. It was scary. You go to what was at the time I was there, I division, which was you're either going to be a mess cook or you're going to work with the ship's bosun's mates that do all of the painting of the outside of the ship. Or actually, I worked with the people in the food service department first. They put me in the mess stall. I was only there for about 2 days, thank God, because it was mostly for the food service people, the ones that were from I division. They were doing everything. It was taking the trash out. It was doing a lot of washing of trays, or picking up after people have eaten, and cleaning it and bagging the trash and carrying it out onto the pier. And yeah, that was the whole thing of their unit. You're working with the mess cooks and the guys in that are cooking and doing the food service, and keeping that area clean, which is a very big thing on an aircraft carrier at sea. You've got to keep things working properly and keep it clean, because you don't want somebody getting hurt. And I think that was one of the main things that we did learn, was the safety that we needed for each other, not just oneself. Became a we, not an I kind of thing. When I originally got to the ship, they put me in the mess stall and painting the anchor chain. Well, it was pretty much, there was not a whole lot of danger because the ship was at pier and all tied down to the dock. What they had me doing was painting the anchor chain from the water, and there was no water. We were in the water, but because the ship was tied up, it didn't need to have anchor dropped. But we were painting the anchor from the inside of the anchor room back to the portion of the anchor that can be seen in an outside area. That was different, because one link of that anchor chain is almost laying side by side. It's about as big as a man. So yeah, it was pretty tough. And again, it was just mainly keeping you busy, getting things cleaned up, and getting the people who haven't been assigned to a permanent station on the ship a place to be, and keep them, you know, doing with what they're doing. And from anchor chain, and there we were finally called up to the flight deck, and I started my journey on the flight deck. And they gave me a job doing the blue shirting, and it was something of an awakening, and I was so happy to be in Florida and out of Chicago and New Jersey, where we were firefighting in the fall months and into the winter time. So getting into Florida, but the first time I saw the boat, I thought, I'll never be able to find my way around. You know, how do you get from the top to the bottom, or the bottom to the top? And yeah, learning the way of the catwalks and the passageways, and you know, there's one direction for the starboard and another direction for going down port. It's quite an education, and it comes slow. Yeah, it was pretty good. I loved it. And you have to work your way up, even though you went through A school, and some people didn't. You had to work your way up from blue shirt level, where you're just the guy that runs around with the plane, and with the plane captain, the guy responsible for the plane, for the pilot, and put on chocks and chains, and you know, move chocks and chains, and carry chocks and chains for the wheels, and making sure they're sturdy and in a sturdy place on the flight deck, and also the firefighting still is something, and that you had to train in. And once you proved yourself as a blue shirt, they will then let you go into your rate of aviation bosun mate. Handler is when you're handling the aircraft under power, going from the place where they're spotted, is what they call it. They spot the planes in a different configuration, depending upon the number of planes that will be catapulting off into the air, and the ones that are coming back after we do that for the recovery of the planes and getting them all parked and safely tied down to the flight deck and that kind of stuff. We went they found out that they had there were, I think, about 5 or 6 guys with me, and they sent us to the air department. The air department covers all of the air departments, the V1, V2, V3, V4. That's the full air department, but I was tasked to be in the V1 service, and that was flight deck work, you know, carrying the chocks and chains till you learn to be safe on the flight deck. And then because I had my airman rating, you have to go through the ranks to become an airman. You have an airman recruit, airman, after the recruit becomes the second class airman, a third class. Once you get to be an airman, then you can strike for the petty officer. But I got put into V1. V1 is the flight deck, V2 is the hangar bay, V3 is the fueling guys, and V4 is the guys that take care of the flight deck for the catapults and arresting gear. So, and I was tasked to V1 and started as a blue shirt, and became, by the time I left at the end of my 4 years, I was Fly 2 petty officer. Fly 2 is, I was 21 years old, 22 years old, and I was responsible for the center part of if you broke the carrier in threes, it was Fly 1 forward, Fly 2, the middle of the ship. Fly 3 was in the back, toward the aft end of the ship. I was a Flight 2 PO and the senior petty officer. There was a chief that was my boss, but I had to train him. He had never been on the flight deck in 16 years. He had always had shore duty. We had a little trouble. My first time we were just doing getting ready kind of cruises. We would leave Mayport and we'd go out with inspectors that would come aboard the ship to make sure that everybody is ready and seagoing and qualifies for it. You had to qualify after you had been off service and the ship not going anywhere, just going under repair and working in the shipping, just getting the ship in shape to go to sea. A lot of it is, again, structural and making painting and getting painting done and cleaning apartments and getting ready for sea. But they did, on the first time at sea, they had inspectors came out and they would run fire drills on the flight deck and set the barricade for a crash landing and that kind of stuff. It was all getting you training, and there was a time component to that. You had to have it done. For the inspectors to pass you, you had to have it done in a specific amount of time. Maybe you would start, as an example, rigging the barricade for a craft that was having trouble, an aircraft that was having trouble with landing gear or something, and you had to set up the net for them to come in. We had to do that in about 2.5 minutes. When we started with the new crew after we were going to trials, sea trials they called it, the sea trials would be graded, and you would be graded every time you went to sea through the sea trials till you could get all of those things done. The firefighting equipment out, the firefighting equipment put away, the crash equipment being all in shape, the hot suits that they had to wear, all of that stuff, and the equipment for it was tested several times before we got ready to go to sea. Then we went first to, we were supposed to be going to a NATO cruise up off of the Scandinavian area. I came home for about a 5-day homestay. My older brother had a baby, and I was going to be the godfather. And the morning of that function, I got a phone call, and a lieutenant commander, my mother took the phone call and let me sleep. And he said, he's sleeping, can I take a message? And I did that. I went down and she said, you had a call today. It was from some lieutenant commander. He wants you to call him. I said, Mom, I'm in the Navy. That's my job. If they call you, you've got to give me the phone. Oh, I got the number. And I called back, and he said I had to be on the next flight available out of the Boston airport. And I thought, that doesn't sound right. And I got back to the ship, and about 3 days after being on the ship, we went to sea. And about, I don't know, maybe a half a day or a day out at sea, they told us we were not going to Scandinavia. We, in fact, were going to the Pacific. And we sailed around from Florida. We went around the Cape of Africa and up into the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea to the Philippines. And we refueled there, and then we started our work off the coast of Vietnam. We didn't go through the Panama Canal. We went around we left Florida and went around the Cape of Africa, South Africa, and into the Indian Ocean. Also, we stop, and when you're a sailor at sea, there's different things that they do with you, not for you, with you, I guess is a better way to say. We had a crossing the equator, and that means you have to join the realm of Neptunus Rex and have the at sea at the equator. You spend about a day, and they initiate the people that were not, and unfortunately our captain, Sanderson at the time, had never crossed the equator. So with the seaman recruit and airman recruit and all of the guys new to the ship, he had to go through it, and it's you're on your knees a lot, and you get your hair cut in the middle of your head, and they razz you and hit you with fire hose. They don't hurt you. It's the initiation, and they might clean you off by washing you out with a salt water hose and a cargo net, and we do that, and then we headed around the Cape of South Africa and into the Indian Ocean. And our next stop, we didn't stop at all. We hoped to stop at Cape Town for mail, but they said, no, we'll get that at the Indian Ocean. And we did. Ultimately, in the Indian Ocean, we got a British tanker that brought some mail out to us, and we did it by highline from the ship, from one ship to the other. And it was quite interesting. And then we home ported from Mayport, Florida. Our home port became the Philippines. There were two areas of the War of Vietnam for a carrier. We had Yankee Station and Dixie Station. Yankee Station was heading north towards North Vietnam, and Dixie Station was operating off the coast of South Vietnam. We had to go through South Vietnam first, through Dixie Station, so that the inspectors readied us to go into the combat zone up north. And once we did that, and I think we did that after our first at sea, they had taken us out for the inspections part. I think we were about 3 weeks. We came back and refueled, and were sent to what they call in-chopped to North Vietnam, and we started flying. We were doing down south, but just shortly. But then we went up into the hothouse, and a lot of learning, by the time we left North Vietnam for the first time at sea, we had, I think we became the best crew we ever were, and we remained that way for we were there, I think we finally came home about 11 months from when we set out. Well, there's all kinds of dangers on the flight deck. The jet intakes, propellered planes at that time, the jet intakes, you have to, and that's part of the training you get with being a blue shirt. The blue shirt guys, with knowing how to chalk and, chain the plane to the deck that help the, guys from the squadron get their jobs doing right. You have an awful lot of learning to do. There was a lot of injuries, and I can tell a quick story about there was, when we were in still in Florida and Virginia, and we were doing our trainings, you get to meet some of the pilots that were flying in Vietnam later with us, and they say hi and you say hi, and you meet each other. And there was a Lieutenant John Cabral as an example. John Cabral was a lieutenant that flew A-7s. That's a single pilot craft. It was one of the big ones being used in the Navy at that time. And we went all through the training, me, mine, and he in his own, with the flying and landing on an aircraft carrier and the dangers of that. Missing the hook, the things that have to be learned by the pilot, and the stuff that has to be learned by the deck crew. It's mostly for the deck crew, it's the safety of that plane and that pilot. This man, John Cabral, we found out that we were both, I lived in Boston, he lived outside of Boston. He went to Boston College, I went to a junior college for my start in, and really realizing that my mom and dad didn't have the money to put me through college. I had 5 brothers and sisters still, and we got to talking about it, and when I was in high school I played some hockey, and we used to go to the Boston College ice skating rink to play our games. And he told me he graduated from Boston College. I said, we're almost like brothers. And he laughed, and we saw each other through his training and his time to get ready through Vietnam. I came upon him one day after chow in the morning in Vietnam. There are parts of a flight deck in most Navy ships where it's officer country, and enlisted people are supposed to stay out of that. And I was coming from the mess hall going to the flight deck, and we were up in North Vietnam at this time. And Lieutenant Cabral and I met eyes, and he goes, Frank, come on, and he called me over, and he said, come with me, and he took me up through the officers area to the shortcuts he had to the flight deck, so I wouldn't have to go up all the deck. I'll count all the decks and go up on the enlisted side. I said, sir, I'm not an officer. I'm not supposed to be there. He said, you're with me, come on. So we did, and he took me up, and we talked going up. I rode the escalator. I didn't even know there was an escalator in an aircraft carrier. And he laughed. He said, well, yeah, we have a few things you don't have, he said. And we were talking, and he ended up getting in his plane. And at one point, I was in training at that time still, and I saw him, and he said, okay, he was headed to his plane. I said, have a good trip. He said, okay, see you when I get back. And Lieutenant Cabral and I said goodbye to each other, and I said, have a good trip, and he said, I'll see you when I get back. But unfortunately, John didn't come back. And it's still 50 years later hard to talk about John Cabral. But again, I thought, excuse me, I thought about him pretty much almost every day. And something would remind me of him, or something would remind me of our talks with kids, you know, going to college, and how glad he was he got through it, and gave him the opportunity that he had, and as an aviator in the Navy, and he was very proud that he was an aviator, and it was nice to look up to, and just have somebody on the ship from not necessarily home, but from back home. And we met this one morning, and when he went to get to his aircraft, and we bid each other adieu, I got into my position in Fly 2, and that fortunately that day, I was actually the yellow shirt that helped bring him on onto the catapult, and I got a little quick thumbs up from him, and handed him off to the V2 officer that was in charge of the cat. It was a waist cat. There's catapults on the forward end of the ship, and there's catapults on the port side of the ship, the aircraft carrier, and they were setting what they called the heavies, the RA-5Cs, the Vigilantes, and the F4s, and the A-7s were going off the port side, and all the heavies were taken off and being shut off on the bow. And give him a little thumbs up when I passed him to the aviation officer that would launch him, and I turned to bring the next plane around as he was catapulted, and unfortunately there was some failure with his aircraft. He got airborne. Unfortunately, the aircraft inverted, and he ended up hitting the water, and he passed away. They were able to recover his body, thankfully, I guess he got out quick enough to clear the aircraft, but not quick enough to save his life. And they brought him back, I would say about an hour and a half, 2 hours after they found him, because they were in launches and recoveries at that point, and the helicopter needed a window and it could land. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I was one of the bearers of the rescue that they had, and they passed him off to me and my crew to take him to sick bay and take his body to sick bay. And the next morning, when we were ending the launch and recovery period, because it took from the time he died and the body was returned to get him ready to send him into Vietnam to send him home. And as I said, I've thought about John for years. I've got a picture of John and in his civilian clothes when he was graduating from college. And my sister lived in the area where his family was from Peabody, and my sister lives out in that area in a place called Woburn. And about 2 or 3 years ago, I got to this site where he was buried, and it's just him and his mom and his dad. And I talked with him again, you know, and told him I missed him. And yeah, but he is one of the, I think at this point, what I think about, not so much as just John, but the adventure and the laughs that we had in the Navy. But there was times when you got to put those big boy pants on and realize when you're in a situation like we were in Vietnam, and like anybody at sea for the Navy or the Coast Guard, we have our fun, but there's times when the memories are just as painful today as it was the day I carried him to sick bay, you know. And fortunately that day was long enough that I got to put him in the helicopter to send him back to his mom and dad. So John Cabral is close to my heart and will always be. And we, you know, there were a lot of people that didn't come home that year, you know, and I think for that cruise, that period between the technicians that had come to the carrier and the people that help repair all the electronic gear and the stuff that comes in. So unfortunately, some of them died in a fire, and I think we were in Singapore. The day launches are always the best. Nighttime, the day ones, they're the best in the regard that you don't have as much to worry about. You don't have you can see everything. It's more, the temperatures are better. Sometimes at night when we were in Vietnam, the temperatures could vary very much. There was one time the second officer behind the captain, one of his jobs, they wanted to figure out how hot the flight deck got during launching of aircraft in the temperature off the coast of Vietnam. Well, he went around and he had a little, I don't know, some kind of an instrument he had that was taking the wind speed and the temperature, but he was going where it wasn't hot. And I guess the air boss at the time told him that he should be out in the center of the deck where all the planes are, and he came out there, and at one point he got out there and the thing started spinning, and I think that the registration number he had when he came in for that point at that part of the flight deck, and this is just one part, was 127 degrees. I think it was 105 to 110 was the daytime temperature, but the temperature on the flight deck from the jet engines and engine exhausts had heated the deck and almost another 20 degrees. And so you could get hot. Unfortunately for me, on a day off, I had a pair of cut-off jeans and a t-shirt and my Navy sneakers on, and I took them off and I climbed up on the top of the firefighting truck and fell asleep and got very badly burned, and I was told, and unfortunately I did it twice, the second time not as bad, but I was told that I was, if I did it for a third time, I was damaging government property, and they would, I'd be reprimanded for that. So I stopped doing that, and I usually went out at night more. But the night launches, especially with the turboprop or the prop engines, gas engines, you had to really watch it, because to some people, the rotation of a propeller is something that entices them to walk towards it. It's something that several people that worked on the flight deck had to be removed from the flight deck because they fell into that spell of walking towards it, not knowing they were walking towards it, and somebody just grabbed them by the back of their shirt and pulled them back. And on the second time, you only get 2 tries. They don't give you very many. When you start doing things that can be injurious to you or the equipment that you might damage, they frown on that. And understandably, they're there to have a job done. If you don't have the equipment, you can't do the job. But yeah, it seemed quieter during the night, but it was a lot more dangerous to have night launches and recoveries, especially if an aircraft was coming back with any type of hung ordnance. Hung ordnance is some rocket or bomb that they tried to initiate to use, and it failed either electrically or it was not mounted properly when you are what they call clearing the deck, and the craft are coming in sequence. The F4s might come in, then the A7s after that. You want to get the planes in their rotation around the ship. They have their set routine that they would do, and you wanted to make sure that they came in first time, get the hook up, get them up there, get them to fold their wings and get them in a spot where you're going to park them till the next launch. And that was much easier to do during the daylight, especially with the hung ordnance, because once he hit the hook and it stopped that multi-ton aircraft to stop in 80 feet with a hook on it, a cord, whatever's loose and hanging comes off the aircraft onto the flight deck, and there's a round down that it goes off the bomb or the missile or whatever it is, follows the path and just goes overboard and into the ocean. Well, sometimes that didn't happen, or sometimes at night you can't see that until it's right in front of you, and you gotta be pretty quick on your feet. But we were Hong Kong, Singapore. Singapore was wonderful. Hong Kong, just for where the kids from Boston get to go and not have to pay anything to the Mediterranean, Singapore, Hong Kong. When the fire in Singapore broke out, I literally
had just got off the ship to take a taxi ferry from Singapore from the ship to the port to get a fellow that worked with me. I knew him through the Navy. He was in dispersing. We became friends down on the mess deck, and he said, "Why do you come down to the lines? Because on paydays on the end of the month, and you get your check, you'd have to get, if they give a section of the ship that would be A through D. If your last name was the letter A through D, go to the mess hall number 3, and you get there, and from then D to J was another group, and you go to the barber shop or some other area of the ship, a hangar bay, and that's how you got paid. But you stood in line, maybe a half an hour, 45 minutes for the time getting paid. We became friends, and he brought me a camera one day, and he asked me to take some pictures, and he started bringing me my paycheck so I didn't have to get in the line. His family paid for us to have a hotel in Singapore, and they paid for it. There was, I think, 5 of us, and we go out to eat, and we had a great time. Singapore was wonderful. The people, the color, the foods, the sights you get to see. I think it was one of the most beautiful ports I've ever been in. From Westpac, we came back. We did a couple of stops in repair facilities. We were in Philadelphia for our shipyard work. We were in Virginia for shipyard work. But after the Westpac cruise, we went. That was a Mediterranean cruise, and by that time I had married. I met a girl whose brother was with me in Vietnam, and on the ride home he was going to Connecticut, and he said, "If you help me pay for gas, I'll take you into Boston to your house, and then pick up my girlfriend, we'll grab some gas, and I'll give you a ride home." I said, "Okay," and we did. He had bought a lot of my brother-in-law had bought a lot of stereo equipment in the Philippines when we were in the Westpac cruise. The reel-to-reels and all the stuff of the early 70s that was available at the PXs. And we did that, and that's basically there. Then we went to the Med, and I was able to get a MAC flight on there. We went from the Med. Most of the ports were Rota, Spain. We were in Italy 2 or 3 times. Istanbul. Istanbul, I didn't go over into the port. I wanted to go back when we went to Spain or Italy and have the time there to get the time off to go to those, because I like that. I didn't think I'd want to be in Istanbul, and a lot of the guys wanted to. And we were outside. Most of the time you're outside the harbor. We saw them pretty often. It was what they called the Bear, I think. It was a Russian bomber that you'd see them, they wouldn't get too close, and every time they got any kind of close, whatever carrier that was in the area that had aircraft in the air, they'd give them a little flyby, or wave to them, or just let them know they were there too, that kind of stuff. But at that period, I think when we came back from Vietnam, I don't think we saw a couple of ships, but they were smaller. They don't seem to get too close to an aircraft carrier. I think they're too afraid to. But the Bear, I don't think we saw it in the time we were there. The 6 months, 8 months. Maybe about 2 or 3 times. The Mediterranean, unfortunately, it was a time for me to get out of the Navy, and well, not unfortunately at that time. I thought, today I wish I had stayed, but I was ready to go home. By that time, I had a wife and 2 kids, and they wanted to give me, at that time, give me my E4 to go on a new carrier and transfer from the Saratoga to one of the newer ones. And they would give me, I had what they called, you had to have test taking to advance in the Navy. You have to pass the test, pass the test, have time and grade, medals, ribbons, whatever you want to call them, to qualify, because you're fighting for the job that 100 guys might be fighting for at that time. And I passed the test 3 times, but I was they called PNA, passed, not advanced. And that which meant I had the education part down, but I did not have a long enough time and grade or enough ribbons or actionable time to make that clear at the point. So when that happened, I realized that the Navy pay and the civilian pay at the time I got out in 1975, because of my 1 semester of college and my background, and I was able to, I had an education in graphic arts. I went to a trade school in Boston, and I worked in the printing and that kind of trade. And I went into a printing job, and I did that for 37 years until they laid me off because the advent of the Macintosh and high school kids that could do it better than, you know, the guys that got a journeymanship. I think I served a 5-year journeymanship in the graphic arts to become a journeyman. 4-color stripper was the title. And Macintosh and all of the electronic, you know, from photography to making a printing plate, that had 15 different jobs that the printing trade had that the Macintosh, and digitally they could do it for a whole lot less money, faster. And the last year that I worked in the business I was in, that we used to spend $1 million a year just on film, and it was a very small shop. And the year that, just before I got laid off, that year when we went fully digital, we didn't spend a penny on it. We lost $1 million worth of profit in 1 year, and that started the layoffs. And now I think I've worked in 6 printers in Connecticut, and I think I can only think of one that's still actively really and live, and all the rest of it. They drop guys who are making $30, $40, $50 an hour to get the job. 17, 18, 20-year-old guy coming out of college would make for that money. And when we went after Vietnam and we went to the Mediterranean, I was walking through a little village in Spain, wearing a pair of Wrangler jeans, and a shopkeeper saw me looking in the window, and he came out and saw I had Wrangler jeans on, and he offered me $50 and 2 pairs of his jeans if I could give him the Wranglers. So you never know what you're going to see. You're never going to know what story you're going to have to talk about, from the John Cabral kind of things to a storekeeper in Spain wanting to buy your jeans. You know, it was fun, and so that's why I really like to have, especially now with my wife, and we're retired, and you know the kids are all gone, and grandkids are around. It's a blessing to have had a life in the Navy, a family in the Navy, and a life outside of the Navy, and a family outside of the Navy. But I also have to remember the John Corrals and the Joe Smiths and the Pete Browns and whoever you want your name to be for your memory. That's one of the greatest things we share together here when we get here. But you make lifelong friends, as we have here now today. With there's 5 or 6 guys that I worked with here with me this weekend, this whole week, and my wife, and you know, I have 3 brothers and 2 sisters. That's my family from mom and dad. But I've got 100 brothers and sisters from my family with the Navy. And that's why I take myself and my wife when we can to these events, is not only to see my family, it's to remember the guys that we weren't able to bring back with us.